the last thing you wrote was something about like Tennessee science teacher
Oh yeah.
Was charged with teaching evolution.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and start here, y'all. Let me switch the sound to this so maybe it sounds better when it's recorded. I'll switch it to my computer speakers as opposed to the big ones in the class. But hopefully that way it will record and sound a little bit better for you guys if you have to watch this at home. All right. So the Scopes monkey trial, right? One of many trials of the century. I'll tell you about another one here in a little bit that happened just 10 years or later or so. Now, John Scopes was a science teacher slash tennis coach, right? And he's charged with the horrific crime of teaching evolution. You're going down, buddy. You know, can you imagine being in jail and, you know, there's all these guys that have killed like 20 people and they're like, what did you do? I taught evolution. Yeah, it's going to be miserable for you in there. But anyway, it's often portrayed as he's innocent school teacher, just teaching, minding his own business, and the man comes down and they bust him and they arrest him. But it was actually kind of a setup thing. Now, the Tennessee legislature had passed kind of a feel-good laws to appease a lot of its more conservative people in the state, making evolution, which, you know, was, I don't want to say it was new, but it wasn't that old at the time, to make it illegal, right? And, you know, and we even see issues today like this, where people are debating what teachers can and can't talk about and that kind of thing. So anyway, y'all, John Scopes is charged, so they pass this law. All right. Now, Scopeshaw is a member of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and believed this violated his rights, and others agreed. And so the ACLU with Scopes agreed to set up him getting caught and busted for teaching this with the hopes that it would make its way to the court where this law could be legally challenged. And also, it would be pretty embarrassing to the state of Tennessee in a lot of ways. Now, the people of the town, Dayton, Tennessee, were all on board with this. They thought it would get them a lot of attention. And to this day, I think every summer, they still have like, you know, a reenactment of the Scopes trial that brings in people. I've yet to go there, but it's on my bucket list, about number 65, to go and do. All right. So it works, y'all. He's teaching evolution when, surprise, surprise, the police are there. Sir, you're teaching evolution. Come with us. And so he's arrested and faces a fine. And I don't know if jail time or not, but he faces a fine for teaching evolution. Now, what happens though, y'all, is things spiral out of control really, really big. Okay? Okay, because this pitted science, Darwin's followers, you know, evolutionists, against Christians who were fundamentalists, who believed in creationism, the belief that the Bible is literally true. And some Christians go for that. Some Christians believe, well, you know, it's kind of relative, you know, maybe a day is really 500 million years or something, and that. But there are others, y'all, that believe that the Bible is literally true, you know. And so they reject this idea. And remember, a lot of them already are feeling that their faith is under attack. So it pits Darwin, shown there. I bet you didn't know he had a primate body like that. And the Holy Bible. One of my first PowerPoint special effects. I'm still proud of that, even though it's been like, I don't know, 10, 12 years since I did that. Now, the two lawyers involved, y'all, are Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, probably two of the greatest lawyers of the time. Now, Bryan, y'all, you guys are like, Mr. D, I remember him. I remember him before. Yes, he is the populist, remember, who ran against William McKinley in 1896. More about him in just a second here. The two men had been friends, often on the same sides in their fight for, you know, the poor guy, the average Joe. But this is going to put them against each other. He is going to destroy William Jennings Bryan on the witness stand, and Bryan is going to die shortly after the trial. Now, the case was not really that hard, y'all. I mean, he did teach evolution. The law says you can't do that. There were witnesses. So He was found guilty.
Guilty as charged.
But the verdict is eventually overturned on a technicality. So it ends up not being that big a deal in a lot of ways as far as scopes. But for America, y'all, this was a big deal. You know, religion versus science. And there was a lot of that kind of thing. Here you see the Anti-Evolution League, the conflict, hell and the high school, right? Hell in the high school. And they're showing you some of the books that are there. Then they're showing you the books by William Jennings Bryan, the good guy. And Bryan, y'all, was kind of I don't want to say he was a religious scholar, but he had a lot of the Bible memorized. So, I mean, he could defend the Bible pretty well. All right, so let's look at the people involved, because this is a chance for Mr. D to talk about, you know, some people that you guys need to remember for STAR as well as AP. William Jennings Bryan had been one of the youngest people ever to run for president. And so by this time, the 1920s, he's getting up there, right? He was the prosecutor in the monkey trial, as we just saw. That is, he's the guy going after Scopes for teaching it. He dies shortly afterwards. Now, so what kind of happened that broke him down? Well, in one of the weirdest techniques ever, Clarence Darrow, I've made it in one word, Clarence Darrow called the prosecutor to the witness stand, okay? And he used him as an expert on religion and had him testify about the Bible. Now, you know, I consider myself a Christian, y'all. I read the Bible, but I do know that there are some contradictions, some things that, you know, you have questions about. You're like, hey, now where did this first go? What does this mean? You know, and that's what Darrow focused in on. Darrow just shot him down and basically kind of humiliated the poor man on the witness stand. You see Darrow here, y'all, with a fan. It was hot and he was just sweating. And like I said, he doesn't last very long after the trial. He died shortly afterwards. There you see Bryan with that fan. Now remember, so who was this William Jennings Bryan? He was the populist candidate for president. And I'm sorry it's cut off on the screen up here. It's not on mine, and I don't know what's going on. Last period, I even got up and tried to adjust it there. I don't know why it's doing this, so my apologies. I'll try to make sure you guys know what it says there. But it says, also a famous populist candidate for president who gave the Cross of Gold speech. Now, here you see his run in 1900. The guy ran for president, y'all, in 1896 against William McKinley, the first modern election in a lot of people's mind. He lost. He ran again in 1900. He lost. And I don't know if it was 1904 or 1908 that he ran again, but he lost. And he wanted to run again in 1912. But Wilson's wife talked him out of it and promised him a job as Secretary of State. And so he did that. What was his Cross of Gold speech all about? Remember, populists, y'all, favored farmers. They favored the debtors, the little guy. And the thing was this. They wanted what was called bimetallism. If you can not only coin gold to use as money, but coin silver to use as money, there's a lot more money out there. And it's a lot easier for debtors to pay back their debt. So what he claimed in his famous speech was that you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns, you know, as Jesus had done. You shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold. Basically say they would be crucifying common man if we only had the gold thing. You remember the Wizard of Oz, y'all? The gold, follow the yellow brick road, and Dorothy having silver shoes in the original book, and basically Oz being the color of green and paper money. I mean, all those weird things. Bryan is believed to be represented by the Cowardly Lion, for example, in this book. So anyway, it makes for an interesting interpretation. Now, let's look at Darrow. Now, when I was a kid, y'all, there was a lot of pressure on me by my parents, especially my mom, for me to become a lawyer. That's what I was supposed to be, a lawyer. You know, when it came time to do those projects in school where you're like, what I'm going to be when I grow up? They're like, so let's write about you being a lawyer. I'm like, okay. And sorry I disappointed you, Mom, and became a lowly high school teacher, but try my best. But anyway, y'all, so Darrow, I read about Darrow and his cases as a kid, and he was a remarkable man. By far the most famous lawyer of his time. He took the cases everyone else was afraid to take, the unpopular cases, right? John Scopes. Most people were for Brian, y'all. Most people didn't like Scopes and were thinking he was a dangerous guy. So taking this case did not help his career. Even though he disagreed with Eugene Debs' socialism, that says Debs down there, he defended Debs because he thought Debs had the right to oppose the draft during World War I. This did not make him any friends either, except among, people like the ACLU, among liberals like that. But the most shocking case he took, y'all, was that of the thrill killers, Leopold and Loeb. Now, sadly, y'all, we've gotten in our world today kind of used to shocking stuff like this, but they weren't then. This was a sign of the end times among a lot of people. So what was so shocking about this? Well, this was up in Chicago. Leopold and Loeb were two wealthy boys, right? They had all the privileges that go along with being wealthy kids. They also had IQs, which was a fairly new thing, above genius. And so one day they're sitting around talking and they're like, you know what? I bet you we could kill somebody and get away with it. We're that smart. So they found a kid down the street, Bobby Franks. Bobby was just 14 years old. They captured him. They tortured the poor little boy for a long time, killed him, and threw his body in the river. And of course, it was shocking, that a little boy, that kind of stuff didn't used to happen, y'all. A little boy, from a good family, getting killed, tortured, all that kind of stuff. Who could have done this? Well, it turns out the geniuses weren't as sharp as everybody thought. One of them had left his glasses behind. Now, you and me, we probably wear regular glasses and stuff like that, but they could probably figure out the prescription and maybe narrow it down to us. These guys, or this one, had such specialized glasses that only a handful of pairs were in town, and it didn't take any time for them to find them. And of course, they confessed. And what was shocking was they didn't have anything against this kid. They just did it for the fun of it, right? So Clarence Darrow represented them. And instead of them getting the death penalty, which like 99.9% of the country wanted, they were able to get life in prison. I think one ended up being killed in jail maybe, or one died there, was eventually released, super old age or something. But why I bring this up, besides the fact that I'm a big true crime buff, I'm very interested in that terrible stuff. I don't know why. But to a lot of people, y'all, this was just a sign that something had happened to America. Our morals were in decline. What was the reason? And people were going to say, well, it's because we're getting away from religion, from God. Others are going to say it's from Hollywood. Other people would try to find other explanations about what had happened. Much like in the 1950s, and I did post, by the way, that domestic part. I'm going to post here a little bit, hopefully, the part about rock and roll and the beatniks and the rebellion to the conformity of the 50s and all of that for y'all. But this just scared people, right? And once again, Clarence Darrow was the man who defended him. And, that takes a certain special amount of guts. He didn't like the guys. He didn't like what they did. But he believed that everybody in this country, especially people who were hated, were owed a trial, okay, a fair trial, right? So there you go. Now, other scandals. If you think of Harding, you got to think of the Teapot Dome scandal, all right? It's the most infamous scandal, besides, of course, the sexual scandals involving him. Now, he himself wasn't involved, but his Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, was. Okay? Now, what it says here is the Secretary of Interior, Albert Fall, by Harry Sinclair and Doe Haney, that's a D, on government oil leases intended for the U.S. Navy. Okay? It involved a $400,000 bribe to Secretary of Interior Albert Ball by Harry Sinclair. Now, Harry Sinclair was the owner of, and I don't know if any of y'all been to California or been out west, but you might have seen these gas stations that have the little green brontosaurus on it. That's Sinclair gasoline or oil. It's still around. Now, this oil underneath this teapot shaped thing, and see, look how much it looks like a teapot. Man, just like one. Okay. But anyway, y'all, there was a lot of oil under that. And that oil, y'all, was intended for the U.S. Navy, which had been converting to oil from coal. So basically, this was oil for our Navy that was basically sold for a bribe to some oil people, right? And the guy pocketed the money. And he ended up, I think, getting like a year in jail and $100,000 fine or something. Not nearly enough, okay? But the one that bothers me the most is the secretary, that's SEC, Secretary of Veteran Affairs Forbes, Forbes, took $200 million in kickbacks. Now, one of the things that had been created after the war, and boy was it needed, was basically a Bureau for Veterans Affairs. Its job, y'all, was to help provide health care, maybe some basic mental health care as we understood it then, for our veterans of the Spanish-American War and our veterans of World War I, and even there were still some Civil War veterans around, y'all, to help take care of these people. But what Forbes did, y'all, was he took kickbacks. Now, this is the way a kickback works. The government has to buy stuff. Maybe it's a hospital bed, right, for these vets. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take bids and pick the best one at the best price to benefit the veterans and for taxpayers. But what he did, y'all, was basically he said to businesses, look, if you pay me some money, if you kick back some of the price for each of those beds, for each of those, surgical garbs and alcohol and all this other kind of stuff that we use, if you pay me back some of the fee, I will get you the contract. We won't even have you compete against the others. So let's say it's $100 bed is what it should cost. They would charge the government $150 for the bed. He would keep $25 and the company would keep an extra $25 above their cost. This is what you mean by you get them the contract and then they kick back some of the overcharging. Boss Tweed had been the guy to really pioneer this back in New York and Tammany Hall. And $200 million, y'all, are believed to have been wasted. Money for our soldiers. I don't know about y'all, but there's a special place in hell for people that do that to our veterans, right? And let's hope he's there. So don't worry about that. But it does mention here, Albert Fall got $100,000 and a year in prison. Basically, the guy who stole $200 million, y'all, he got 2 years in prison and a $10 fine. I mean, that's just like nothing, y'all. And we don't know if Harding was involved, but we do know that, he was afraid to say no. He was afraid to go after his friends. And I do believe it contributed to his death in one way or another. Now, the 1920s, as you guys know, are called the Roaring Twenties. It's a time of great prosperity. President Calvin Coolidge was, as Republicans often were in those days, a big believer in laissez-faire. Now, this went back, way back to Adam Smith, and that belief, y'all, that government should leave business alone and let supply and demand figure out prices. But in fact, y'all, even though theoretically our government was staying out of business, in fact, it was very friendly with business, having high tariffs in Republican administrations to limit competition, going after unions, for example, favoring owners over workers in many different cases like that, granting very generous subsidies. So, in fact, y'all, our government was not just staying out of business. It was actually a big part of it. Here's a famous quote from Coolidge. Wouldn't be bad for you guys to memorize it because it really captures sort of this idea of the 20s prosperity. Coolidge is alleged to have said, the business of America is business. In other words, this country should be about business, right? That's what it's for. This could be compared, if you listen to my thing that I did on the 50s with the chairman of General Motors saying, what's good for General Motors is good for America and vice versa. Basically, if it's good for business, it's good for the country. If it's good for the country, it's good for business. And so you kind of see how much on the side of business these guys were. So what led to this prosperity? Well, one thing, taxes were kept very low. Watch while Mr. D lowers taxes here. It's going to be amazing. Whoa. That was awesome, Mr. D. And the government, y'all, did not go after trust cases. Now, remember, Wilson, to a lesser extent, I guess, but especially Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, y'all, had gone after these big, giant monopolies, these combination of companies that we call trust, like Standard Oil, and broken them up. Not these Republicans. Nope, that was fine. If they became successful and big, hey, kudos to them. The thing, y'all, and I'll make a bad pun here, the vehicle of 1920s prosperity, get that, was the Model T, was the automobile industry, first with the Ford Model Ts and other companies, Chrysler, Dodge, Chevrolet, and all the other General Motors companies as well too, Buick, etc. Now, so how did this work? Well, think about it. To make a car, you need steel. We did this when we talked about railroads. You need leather for the seats. You need rubber for the tires. You need glass for the windows, for the lights. And of course, you need lots of rows. Think how many people, y'all, got jobs making the stuff that went into these cars, building the roads and all of that. And Ford, though he himself didn't allow credit, to buy his cars, the other companies got very smart, y'all, and they offered credit. So, hey, I may not be able to afford a car, but I'm going to buy one anyway and pay for it over the next 5 years or something. All right. The other thing too, y'all, the 20s was the great age of advertising. Now, a lot of it was print, like you see here, but also a lot of it was on the radio. Now, it became an art. And, I don't know if you guys ever have studied any marketing or if any of you have plans to get into that, but it's really interesting to see how companies manipulate you and me to buy certain brands. Like if you guys learned about like product placement and stuff in stores and how they go about that, how they try to appeal to you and me to create a need we didn't know we have. It's kind of scary. It's fascinating, but you get kind of mad. Okay. So advertising really takes off. You saw in the video them talking about for the first time people using, deodorant, using mouthwash. People didn't used to care if your mouth, smelled bad. We all smelled bad. Our breath smelled bad, whatever. But they really you don't want to be that guy. Come on. Women are going to hate you. Guys aren't going to like you. Let's just shave those armpits. Remember, make every armpit into a charm pit. And stuff like that. So it was a big time for it. But all of this, y'all, was basically done using credit. Now, you and I live in a world of credit today. You and I probably, your parents, you guys maybe, buy stuff on credit. My parents were very generous and let me have a credit card only to buy gas. That was the instructions. I could only get gas on it or if there was a real emergency. So that was really cool for me to have throughout high school and college. So that was it. But eventually, y'all, in college, I got besieged by all these companies to get a credit card. Hey, I got one, got another, got in a lot of trouble. Ended up spending way too much. Because what's easy to happen, y'all, is you spend more than you can pay back in a month. And then when that happens, they charge you a finance charge, 10, 15, 20%. Now, let's say you borrowed $100 from them, essentially what credit is. Now you owe $120. Next month, it's going to be $133 or something like that. I mean, it's probably not quite that high. I'm exaggerating. But the thing is, y'all, if you don't pay it back quickly enough, you can end up paying 2 times, 3 times as much as what the item was if you draw it out and pay the minimum. Now, we didn't have credit cards in the 20s. That would come around in the 50s. It would also be another reason, y'all, for the big prosperity of the 50s. You know, people are basically saying, buy, 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 and here's some money. Go ahead and buy, and you don't have to pay it back. People call it the never, never. You know, hey, I'm never going to have to pay it back. And so Americans, y'all, thinking the good times would always continue, they bought lots of stuff on credit. High ticket items, y'all, like early refrigerators, radios that cost $200 or $300 that might take them a couple of years to pay off. And the thing is, hey, I'm always going to have my job. The good times are going to keep on going. Laissez le bon temps brûler or whatever, right? Let the good times roll. And so, but the thing is, y'all, when the Great Depression comes and 25% of the country loses their jobs, now you're still having to make those payments, but you ain't got any money coming in. Eventually, you default on it. Companies realize we can't keep making stuff because nobody can buy stuff. We have to lay off more people. And so remember, y'all, the prosperity of the 20s was built on what we call a mountain of debt, a mountain of credit. And eventually there's an avalanche or a landslide. And of course, that's the Great Depression. Speaking of marketing, y'all, I see this and I'm having flashbacks. My daughter, when she was little, we got her this cool little like doll play set that had like a store, right? That, you know, Barbie or whatever could go in and shop in. And it came with a little credit card scanner. Now, it didn't really work, but it was basically, you know, like, oh, I want to buy such and such, or Barbie's buying such and such. Slide your little pretend credit card on this. Well, what was that teaching her? To buy stuff on credit. And trust me, she didn't need to learn that. Her mother had taught her well already. It's one of the reasons why she's my ex-wife. But anyway, not to get personal there, but I got personal. All right. So for farmers, y'all, the 20s were they were like the only group that didn't have a good time. The war had been a good time for the farmers. Now, why was that the case? Well, during the war, right, a lot of the men are off fighting, especially in Europe. So Europe can't grow food. A lot of their farmland is devastated because it's battlefields. And so during the war, y'all, the U.S. government had encouraged our farmers to grow, 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 so that they then could take those surpluses. I mean, they could take all that food and sell it or even give it to countries in Europe. I mean, we fed Belgium, y'all. We fed the British. We fed the Russians. When the Russians had their terrible famine in the mid-20s, y'all, we sent over tons and tons of food to keep them all from dying. And it's, I hate to say it, but it's often forgotten by the Russians that we did that very, very generous act. Now, so prices, y'all, were very high for farmers. So if I'm a farmer and prices are high, I need to buy me some more land. I need to get me the most advanced type of equipment I can. Go from simple plows, which should be showing up here any moment, to instead having cool tractors. So not only did farmers get more land, they could grow more food on that land. New modern fertilizers, y'all, greatly caused prices to, not prices, but production to swell up. And as long as there was the demand for that, y'all, they made good money. But in late 1918, the war ends. The boys go home. The battlefields are made back into farm fields. And suddenly, they don't need all this food. But the trouble is, you plant, you know, months and months in advance. Maybe a year or more you plant into it. Our farmers are all seriously in debt because of this, y'all. And so they're having to grow more food than ever, much like the farmers in Jamestown, remember, who grew too much tobacco and then the prices fell. So what was their solution? I got to grow more because I got to sell more, even though I'm not making as much on it to get the money I need that I used to have, right? So it's a crazy, crazy vicious cycle. So when President Coolidge, y'all, vetoed McNary-Hogan, when he vetoed the McNary-Hogan bill, which would commit the government to buying all this stuff, that's why farmers were so disappointed. And some of them, y'all, would ultimately desert the Republican Party and support President Roosevelt and his New Deal. Now, what Roosevelt does, y'all, is the government commits itself to buying these surpluses. And sometimes they would be distributed to the poor. Sometimes they were just wasted. And so essentially, y'all, we even got to the point, and I remember this going on into the 60s and 70s, we paid some farmers, y'all, not to farm. Now that sounds crazy, but if they farmed and they added all their farm produce to everything, it's going to depress prices. So in a way, if you guys wonder when you guys go and get those Fruit Loops or my Lucky Charms or whatever, and you're like, why am I paying $5 or $6 for a box with just a little bit of grains in it? You can thank the 1920s and the New Deal, because we want farmers to stay in business. We don't want farm prices to be too low. And to this day, we continue that. A friend of mine's dad grew cotton in South Texas, and it broke his heart. But the government basically told him they would pay him to just plow all of his cotton underground, to just get rid of it. And, you know, it was money, and he needed money. It was the Great Depression, so he did it. So I'm going to teach you about half of your economics you need to know for next year with this slide. This is supply and demand. It's going to be your two good friends. This isn't on your notes. You can just kind of follow along here. Now, what's supposed to happen in an economics, y'all, is you have a demand curve here. This makes perfect sense, right? At lower prices, you and I demand a higher quantity. When prices are super high, not too many people demand stuff. Supply, companies that supply at a low price, who wants to be in that business and get paid nothing for it? But as prices go up, more and more companies are willing to produce, able to produce, and they supply even more. Eventually, these two places meet at what's called an equilibrium point. This many people want it, and this much is supplied. Everybody goes home happy, right? That is called equilibrium or market clearing price. That's the way it was before World War I for our farmers. Okay, World War I comes along. Suddenly, there's much more demand over in Europe. The government's buying a lot of these crops. Boom, the price goes way up to here. They're growing more food, and they're even charging more for it, okay? Because there is so much higher demand. What do businesses do? Wow, I can make more money. They want more farm goods. I better start growing more stuff. So indeed, supply increases a great deal. But if demand falls back to what it was, which is what happened when the war ended, y'all, what's going to happen to the price? It's going to tumble to maybe a third of what it was. That is what happened to our farmers. Now you know the first semester, well, half of the first semester of economics, y'all. You're welcome. Okay. Now, another group that had problems were the unions, okay? Not a really good time, because a lot of people, y'all, got very impatient with unions because of their strikes. Same thing happens after World War II. We have all these strikes take place by unions, and we end up getting the Taft-Hartley Act, a very anti-union act. So during the 1920s, we see membership drop by about a fifth in unions. Now, how was this happening? Many companies, y'all, insisted on what was called the open shop. In other words, you don't have to be a member of the union to get this job. What unions want is what's called the closed shop, right? Where you have to be a member of the union to get the job. Like, for example, when I graduated from high school, literally the next day, my dad put me to work during the summer, driving trucks, right? I was driving trucks in a refinery. But I couldn't get that job unless I joined the Teamsters Union, which I did join. Got paid really, really well, by the way. But I wouldn't have had that job if I didn't. That was a closed shop, okay? Companies, y'all, got pretty clever, too. So workers were benefiting even if they weren't a member of a union, because the companies are like, hey, how would you like all the benefits of being in a union? You know, like a pension when you retire? You know, some money coming your way. How would you like some higher wages? Maybe some basic health care? But don't join a union. We'll give that to you. And so that's what companies did to kind of cut out the unions. Also, too, y'all, unions tried. They tried really hard, eventually getting some success, but never the success they had up north, to unionize the textile workers in the South. Now, you guys have heard of outsourcing, right? What is outsourcing? You switch to another country. Why would you do that? You can pay them less. Do they have the same environmental rules as we do? Heck no, right? Do they have the same safety that we do? Heck no, right? We can pay them nothing and that. And it's sad. But you know, that's where a lot of our tennis shoes are made. That's where a lot of stuff is made because that's where companies win. It's cheaper, and you and I like cheap, okay? So the same thing happened in America, y'all, after the Civil War, after Reconstruction. Unions had started being successful up north, and so some of the companies start looking at what can we do to cut costs. Hey, how about moving our factories to the South? Man, land is dirt cheap down in the South. And you know what? There's like almost no taxes. They don't have state income taxes. There's super low taxes. And you know what? They don't like unions. They're real suspicious of them. And so for those reasons, lower taxes, lower price of land, all those kind of things, they start moving to the South. So unions are finding themselves losing jobs up north. So they're like, okay, we'll just unionize those people in the South. But homie wasn't going to play that, right? In the South, y'all, we just were always, and to this day, there's still a lot of Southerners that just aren't comfortable with unions. Like, for example, we in Texas, we don't have a teachers union. They have them up north. We have associations, but we don't have unions because that's just not, you know, we're not supposed to do that in Texas. Now, the police was very much against these guys. They broke up any time these union guys would visit trying to do it. Places like, for example, y'all, Levi's, which moved to or really got going in North Carolina, was there until recently. I think Levi's now has outsourced, sadly. I have to check that out. But militias, you know, little groups that were kind of hired by the police or hired by the officials, and plain old mobs, y'all, would come and break up any of the union protests or attempts to unionize. So they lost membership to Southern businesses. The Republican administration, and to this day, generally speaking, Democrats tend to be more supportive of unions than Republicans do. And it was definitely the case in the 1920s when the Supreme Court, federal courts, Republican administrations went against the unions in many cases. The Attorney General Daugherty, before he got caught, you know, for bribes and all that kind of stuff, he used a familiar tool against unions. That's what's called the injunction. Now, an injunction is when a judge orders you not to do something. And so when the railroad workers went on strike, the judge ordered them not to go on strike. If you break the rule, you're going to jail. Same thing had happened in the Pullman strike, y'all, of the 1890s. I think it was 1890s, with Eugene Debs, who was then in charge of the railroad workers. Debs violated the injunction, and that's why he went to jail the first time. And that's where he became a socialist. So it was a powerful tool. And then, y'all, there was violence. And, you know, if you remember back to 88, the Haymarket bombing, when a group of anarchists met, somebody threw a bomb, killed some cops. Everybody blamed all, not just the anarchists, but they blamed all unions. And it caused the collapse of the, what was the name of that union? I just went absolutely, the Knights of Labor, the Knights of Labor, caused that to fail. And so a lot of the protests in Pennsylvania, that's what PA stands for, of course, had turned violent. Workers clashed with police, people actually got killed, and Americans are like, no, we can't be having this. So unions began to look bad. And then also, y'all, remember, this is the Red Scare. A lot of Americans still couldn't separate in their minds that you can have a union of workers, but that they aren't necessarily communists. Even though the American Federation of Labor went to great lengths, y'all, to try to say, look, we're a union. We're anti-communist. We don't want what communists want. A lot of Americans, you know, I hate to say it, y'all, but there are some of us that are kind of dumb, like union, workers, communists. Okay, I get it. You know, it's kind of hard for some of them to differentiate between the two. Education. All right, more and more states, that's what that says, made school attendance compulsory. Sorry if that's cut off on the screen up in the room. More and more states made attendance compulsory. Now, one of the big successes, y'all, of Reconstruction had been education in the South for whites and for blacks. Now, remember, in the South, education before the Civil War was something you got at home. It wasn't free, and it was only available to pretty much middle class, wealthy kids. All right. But after the Civil War, we required it to be made available for free for whites and blacks. Sadly, as you guys know, African American kids did not go to the same quality of schools or have the same quality of instruction, but at least they were finally able to get some education, and same with the white kids who couldn't have gotten it either. Here you see what a schoolroom would have looked like back then. I had one of those desks in 4th grade, y'all. It was awesome. You lift up the top, the wooden top, and you had a little like area down there that you could store your stuff in it for the whole day. Wish I had one of those now. That'd be awesome. Now, after the 1950s with the GI Bill, we double the number of college graduates because that's what was required. You had to go to college if you want a decent job. After World War I, y'all, if you wanted a decent job, you had to graduate from high school. You wouldn't believe the number of people, y'all, who simply went to say grade 7 or grade 8, and that was it. They were done. Man, go off in the workforce, buddy. Start making money, you know? That was kind of it. But we start seeing that high school is necessary. So we start getting a more educated population. This is a whole graduating class. You know, compare that to when Adobe's like graduating class with 1,000 kids in it. My mom, when she graduated in 1943, there were 16 people in her graduating class. 16, y'all. Imagine you could be like an average kid and say, I'm in the top 10. Right? And, you know, it would have been pretty awesome, right? The Little Red Schoolhouse, which became famous like this, y'all, is soon replaced by this school, which looks a lot like Dawson. My students in 3rd or 4th period said, if you've ever seen Dawson. You know, I helped build Dawson High School, y'all. Did y'all know that? Yeah. Yeah, my tax dollars. I live in Pearland, so my tax dollars went there. All right. I was going to tell y'all some story about something or other. I can't remember what it was going to be, but I'm sure it was fascinating. And I'll leave it there. Y'all take care. I'll see you mañana. Spanish for Friday.